Have you ever experienced something so impossible that it made you question your own sanity? What would you do if the one person you were taught never to believe in suddenly showed up in your life and changed everything? Today, I'm sharing a story that will challenge everything you think you know about faith, identity, and divine encounters. Please stay with me till the end to find out this really heartbreaking, but yet genuine and God-willed testimony. Before we continue, I want to ask you something important. Please comment below and tell me where you're watching from, whether you're in America, Africa, Europe, Asia, or anywhere else in this beautiful world. Let's connect as a family. Let's continue to pray for each other and support one another in faith. Now, let me take you back to a night in 2016 that forever altered the course of my life. My name is Rachel Mizrahi, and I was 32 years old when my world turned completely upside down. I grew up in Caracas, Venezuela, in a traditional Jewish household. My father, David, had spent his childhood in a yeshiva orphanage in Morocco after losing his parents young. My mother, Esther, came from a long line of observant Jews, with a great-grandfather who served as a rabbi in Eastern Europe before the family scattered across continents. Religion was complicated in our home. My father wanted nothing to do with organized faith after his difficult childhood, yet we still observed the major holidays. Every few Fridays, we attended the local Chabad synagogue. We lit Shabbat candles. We celebrated Passover, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur. I knew the prayers, the traditions, the stories passed down through generations. But no one ever mentioned Jesus to me. Not once in our world. He simply did not exist as anything more than a historical figure that other people believed in. When I was 28, Venezuela's political situation became unbearable. My mother's entire family lived in France, so that's where I went, settling in a suburb outside Paris. My parents planned to follow later. I took very little with me when I left, just clothes, photographs, and one old Bible from my parents' library that I grabbed without much thought. France was harder than I expected. The anti-Semitism was real and frightening. I learned quickly not to wear my Star of David necklace in public. I taught my son, who was 7 at the time, to keep his identity quiet at school. We lived carefully, always aware that being Jewish in Europe meant being cautious. Then I got sick, really sick. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. The pain was constant and overwhelming. I tried everything they suggested, but nothing worked. I was losing hope, losing strength, losing myself to this mysterious illness that had no name and no cure. One night, alone in my apartment after my son had fallen asleep, I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed, not the memorized Hebrew prayers from synagogue, but a raw, desperate conversation with the Creator. I begged for healing. I told God I couldn't go on like this. I needed help. I needed a miracle. That night, I had the dream. He appeared in front of me, face to face. I knew immediately who he was, though I couldn't explain how I knew. His presence was overwhelming, filled with love I had never experienced before. He reached out and placed his hands on me, and I felt warmth flood through my entire body. The pain that had been my constant companion for months simply vanished. Then I woke up. I lay in bed, my heart pounding, my mind racing. The pain was gone, completely gone, but the confusion and fear that replaced it were almost worse. I started crying and couldn't stop. What had just happened? I had prayed to God, to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he had sent Jesus? How could that be? Why would he do that? For days, I felt like I was losing my mind. I didn't tell anyone about the dream. I tried to push it out of my thoughts. I didn't even thank God for healing me because I was so confused and frightened by what had happened. How could Jesus be in my dream? How did I know it was him? Why did his presence feel so real, so undeniably true? 10 months passed. I went back to my life, but the memory of that dream never left me. The healing remained, but so did the questions. Then one Tuesday afternoon, someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find an American woman standing there, speaking French with such a terrible accent that I almost smiled despite my confusion. She asked me if I was Jewish. She told me that someone had mentioned a Jewish family lived in this building, and she had come to show me something important. I invited her in, curious and a bit wary. She introduced herself as Linda, a missionary who had been working in France for several years. She told me she wanted to show me my Jewish Messiah in my own Hebrew scriptures. I was shocked. This was exactly what I had been wrestling with for almost a year. Was this a coincidence? Could God really be pursuing me? Linda came to my apartment every week for months. We didn't start with the New Testament. Instead, we sat together and read through the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, the scriptures I had grown up with. She showed me passages I had read 100 times before, but now they looked different. Genesis, Exodus, the Psalms, Isaiah, Daniel, Zechariah. Everywhere I looked, I began to see him. The prophecies were clear. A suffering servant who would bear our sins. A son born to us. A shepherd struck down. A pierced one that Israel would mourn. How had I never seen this before? How had my people missed this for 2,000 years? When we finally reached Zechariah chapter 12, something broke open inside me. The weight of truth became so overwhelming that I fell to my knees right there in my living room. Linda prayed with me, and I received Yeshua into my heart. Then I cried. I cried for 4 hours straight. I cried for the missing, for the blindness, for the 2 millennia of rejection. I cried because I realized that the Gentiles had embraced our Messiah while we had turned him away. The pain of that realization was almost unbearable. It felt like discovering that your family had rejected a beloved brother, and now you had to face that truth and all its implications. But my tears that day were nothing compared to what came next. The next morning, filled with joy and excitement, I called my parents back in Venezuela. I told them I had discovered the most amazing truth. I explained that Yeshua was the Messiah we had been waiting for, that he fulfilled all the prophecies, that everything made sense now. The phone went silent. Then my father started shouting. He told me I had lost my mind. He said I had betrayed my family, my heritage, my people. My mother got on the phone crying, begging me to stop this nonsense. They told me I was confused, that France had changed me, that I needed to come home immediately so they could help me. I tried to explain, but they wouldn't listen. The conversation ended with my father telling me not to call back until I had come to my senses. That was just the beginning. Within a week, somehow the news had spread. My mother must have called her family in France because suddenly I started receiving phone calls from aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. They were angry, disappointed, horrified. They told me I was a traitor. They said I had disgraced the family name. One uncle told me I was dead to him. Then it got worse at the local synagogue. Someone recognized me one Saturday and confronted me in the parking lot. He asked if the rumors were true, if I had really become a Christian. When I tried to explain that I had simply accepted Yeshua as the Jewish Messiah, he spat at my feet and called me a disgrace. Others gathered around, and I had to leave quickly, my face burning with shame and tears streaming down my cheeks. My son started coming home from school crying. Other Jewish children had heard about me and were telling him that his mother was a betrayer, that we weren't really Jewish anymore. He was only 8 years old, and he didn't understand why his friends suddenly wouldn't play with him. The isolation became crushing. Friends stopped answering my calls. Invitations to family events stopped coming. On holidays, when I would normally be surrounded by family, my apartment was silent except for my son and me. I felt like I was being erased from my community, cut off from everything I had known my whole life. There were nights when I questioned everything. Had I made a terrible mistake? Was this truth worth losing everyone I loved? The loneliness was suffocating. Sometimes I would sit in my apartment after my son fell asleep and cry until I had no tears left. The pain of rejection from my own people was worse than any physical illness I had ever experienced. But every time I doubted, I would open my Bible and see him there again. I would remember that dream, that healing touch, that overwhelming love. And I knew, deep in my soul, that despite all the pain, I had found truth. I had found him. Years passed slowly. I made Aliyah to Israel with my son when he was 12, hoping for a fresh start. My parents had already moved there, but they still weren't speaking to me much. Every conversation was strained and painful, but I never stopped praying for them. I never stopped sharing the prophecies with my son. helping him understand why we believed what we believed. And slowly, carefully, we began sharing those same prophecies with my parents during our occasional visits. In 2018, something miraculous happened. My father called me one evening and asked if we could talk. He told me he and my mother had been reading the scriptures again, looking at the passages I had shown them over the years. They had questions. Real questions, not accusations. Over the following months, I watched as the same transformation that had happened in my life began happening in theirs. They started seeing Yeshua in the Hebrew scriptures. They began understanding. And one beautiful Shabbat afternoon, both of my parents prayed to receive Yeshua as their Messiah. I wept again that day, but these were tears of joy. The persecution hadn't ended. We still faced challenges from the wider community, but having my parents embrace the truth made everything I had endured worth it. If you're reading this today, I want you to know something important. Right now, believers around the world are facing persecution far worse than what I experienced. They're losing not just relationships, but their freedom, their safety, their very lives. Please, I beg you, pray for them. Pray for the persecuted church. Pray for strength, protection, and miracles. And if you're reading this and you've never given your life to Yeshua, maybe you're feeling something stirring in your heart right now. You don't have to wait for a dream or a miraculous healing. You can come to him right where you are. Pray this with me. Dear Yeshua, I recognize that I'm a sinner and I need you. I believe you died for my sins and rose again. Please forgive me and come into my life. Make me new. I choose to follow you from this day forward. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, you've just begun the most important journey of your life. It may not be easy, but it will be worth it. Please share this story, comment below, like this video, and subscribe so we can continue sharing testimonies that point people to truth. Let's be a family that supports one another across every nation and culture. Shalom and blessings to you all.